That feeling,
Yeah.
you know the one. It's not just being tired after a long day, is it?
No, definitely not.
It's that deep down weariness, the kind that sort of settles in your bones and feels heavier than just physical exhaustion. If you know what I'm talking about, well, you're in the right place.
Yeah, that profound, extreme sense of tiredness is exactly what we're going to unpack today. We've gathered a really rich set of material to delve into its layers, explore its origins, and hopefully give you a clear understanding of what's, really going on.
Right. So our mission basically is to take this complex feeling apart, piece by piece. We're drawing on some really fascinating perspectives within our sources.
Yeah, the material is great.
And believe me, it's wide-ranging from like how our minds work to the big philosophical questions, a look back at history, and even some surprising insights from the world of AI.
It's a truly interdisciplinary exploration. We'll be looking at this through psychological, philosophical, historical lenses, and even touching on some computational models.
Wow.
Yeah, our goal is really just to distill the most crucial nuggets of knowledge for you.
So let's dive right in and see what we can uncover about this pervasive feeling of being utterly, deeply tired.
Yeah.
When we talk about being extremely tired, it's clearly not just about needing like an extra hour of sleep. What's the real difference here?
That's a key distinction, definitely. We need to separate simple physical fatigue from what we might call a deeper existential malaise.
Existential malaise. Okay.
Our sources introduce Dr. Beulah-Connell's concept of existential fatigue. She describes it as the weight of the world on your soul, mind, and emotions.
The weight of the world. Wow. Yeah, that resonates deeply. So what's the root of that feeling? Is it just everything?
Well, Dr. Connell suggests it's often tied to our fundamental search for meaning and purpose.
Right.
When that search feels, prolonged or doesn't yield satisfying answers, it can lead to a pretty stark confrontation with our own mortality. It kind of strips away some of our more comforting illusions.
So it's connected to those big questions we all grapple with, like what's the point kind of thing.
Precisely. And this links directly to the idea of ontological existential exhaustion.
Okay, break that down.
Right. So think of it in two parts. First, there's the fatigue of being oneself. That constant effort, maintaining our identity, our story, navigating social norms.
Yeah, that is tiring.
It really is. And then, even more profoundly, there's the fatigue of being living, existing itself. Just a fundamental weariness with the very act of being alive.
The fatigue of just being. Wow. That sounds like a tremendous burden.
It is. And what's so interesting looking through the sources is how the language we use for this has shifted over time.
Oh, yeah?
We've seen terms like acedia, melancholy, ennui, neurasthenia, burnout, and now existential fatigue. While the core feeling, that sense of listlessness, lack of meaning, seems persistent, the explanations we give it and how society understands it have changed dramatically.
It's almost as if we're always wrestling with the same core human experience. But the story we tell ourselves about it, it just evolves.
Exactly.
And the listener's point about modern stressors, things like drugs, alcohol, greed, relationships, that really highlights how these timeless struggles show up in our current context.
Absolutely. It connects the historical thread to the now.
It's strangely reassuring, isn't it, to realize this isn't just a modern thing, that this profound weariness has been a part of the human experience for a long, long time.
Absolutely. Our sources really emphasize that. This isn't unique to our current era. This deep sense of weariness in its various forms, it just seems to be a universal human experience. It touches people across all walks of life, all through history.
Can you give me some examples? Like, how did this show up in the past?
Certainly. Take acedia, for instance. It has roots in ancient Greece, meaning negligence, but it really took hold with early Christian monks.
Okay, monks. How so?
They described it as a kind of spiritual apathy, a state of listlessness, an inability to engage with their spiritual practices, their work, even their prayers.
Wow.
Intriguingly, it was sometimes called the noonday demon.
A noonday demon. It sounds quite intense. So it was primarily seen as a spiritual struggle then?
Initially, yes, very much so. Later, in medieval times, it was even considered one of the deadly sins, sloth.
Sloth, right. Laziness.
Well, sort of. It was more complex. Some defined it as a kind of sorrow about spiritual good, a turning away that could ultimately lead to despair.
Okay, what else?
Then we have ennui. That gained prominence in the 18th century, particularly among the affluent, the leisured classes.
Okay.
It was described as a draining listlessness, linked to having maybe too much leisure and a lack of meaningful pursuits, a kind of profound boredom.
So a weariness that arose from privilege and, like, a lack of purpose? That's a totally different angle.
Precisely. And our sources also highlight how existential crises, those internal conflicts where life seems to lack inherent meaning, tend to pop up at different points in our lives.
Right.
Each stage brings its own unique anxieties about who we are and what we're actually here for.
Teenage years, midlife, those definitely come to mind as times of big existential questioning for a lot of people.
Exactly. And if we zoom out even further, the rise of existentialist philosophy after World War II, you can view that as a widespread societal response.
To what?
To profound disillusionment, the collapse of established belief systems. It was a collective grappling with a deep sense of societal weariness post-war.
It feels like this weariness has so many different facets. It's definitely not just one simple thing.
Absolutely not. Our sources paint a picture of a whole spectrum of weariness, ranging from the psychological strains we experience day to day to the more profound existential depths.
Okay.
Maybe we can try to unpack some of these different faces of tiredness.
Yeah, let's do that. Where should we start on the psychological side of things?
Okay, we can begin with stress fatigue, sometimes called crisis fatigue.
Right. Heard of that.
This is that overwhelming exhaustion that just builds up from prolonged exposure to stress, especially during, extended periods of challenge or uncertainty. It's like our fight or flight system gets stuck on.
Yeah.
And that leads to what's called allostatic overload, essentially, wear and tear on our physical and mental systems.
That constant low-level hum of stress that just drains your reserves over time.
Precisely. Then there's mental exhaustion. This often comes from long-term stress and just a heavy cognitive load.
Like thinking too much.
Yeah, basically. Think of symptoms like apathy, cynicism, difficulty concentrating, losing interest in things you once enjoyed. Common contributors: chronic stress, uncertainty, pressures from work, family, emotional labor, maybe just a lack of attention to self-care.
It's like your mental battery just gets completely, utterly depleted.
Exactly. A perfect analogy. And then related, we have occupational burnout. The World Health Organization specifically defines this in the context of work.
Okay, so work specific.
Yes. It's characterized by feeling utterly drained of energy, developing increased mental distance or cynicism towards your job.
Right, that feeling of just not caring about your work anymore.
Yes, that mental detachment is a key indicator, and also a reduced sense of professional accomplishment.
Got it.
And finally, in this kind of psychological realm, there's social fatigue. Some people describe it as their social battery draining.
Oh yeah, definitely felt that.
Right. It's that depletion of energy that happens during and after social interactions. It stems from the cognitive effort involved processing social cues, managing how you present yourself, regulating your emotions.
That makes perfect sense, especially maybe for introverts. But I can see how it could affect anyone depending on their mental state that day.
Absolutely. Now, shifting our focus a bit towards the existential dimensions of weariness.
Okay.
We come back to Dr. Kanyal's existential fatigue, that weight of the world feeling. Arising from our search for meaning, our confrontation with mortality, it connects with what Anna Katharina Schaffner observed, a pervasive physical and spiritual exhaustion in contemporary society.
That feeling that goes beyond just our personal struggles, like it's in the air somehow.
Exactly. Then there's existential angst, or dread. This is a central idea in existential philosophy.
Well, yeah.
It isn't just regular anxiety about, say, a deadline. It's a profound unease about our fundamental freedom, the inherent responsibility that comes with it, the inescapable uncertainty of life, and that underlying possibility of meaninglessness. Thinkers like Heidegger, Sartre, they explored this really deeply.
Sartre's idea of being condemned to be free, that's such a weighty concept. Freedom is a burden.
It is, and existential crises, often triggered by significant life events, losing a job, a relationship ending, a major illness, they can bring these feelings sharply into focus.
Yeah.
And finally, we have that ontological existential exhaustion we touched on earlier.
Remind me.
The fatigue of being oneself, maintaining that narrative, and the even deeper fatigue of being living, existing itself. This is a weariness that really edges towards a desire for the cessation of being.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like these different types of weariness, psychological, existential, they're not truly isolated from each other, are they?
Not at all. That's a key point in the sources. They often interact and amplify one another. Psychological burdens can make existential concerns feel heavier, feel more immediate, and vice versa. Existential dread can certainly worsen anxiety or depression. It's a kind of synergistic effect that contributes to that profound, extreme tiredness.
Makes sense.
And it's worth noting the difference again. Psychological tiredness often involves a sense of depletion, like that drained battery. Existential fatigue is maybe more rooted in grappling with meaning, purpose, and the nature of reality itself.
Let's maybe revisit some of those historical examples again. Acedia still strikes me as particularly interesting. What more can it tell us about how we understand weariness today?
It is fascinating. As we mentioned, it comes from the Greek for negligence. But it developed this very specific meaning among those early Christian monks.
Right, the noonday demon.
Exactly. It wasn't simply about being lazy, you know. It was a profound spiritual listlessness, an inability to feel motivated for prayer or to engage with their spiritual work. The name itself suggests how oppressive and consuming this feeling could be.
So it was viewed as a real spiritual battle they were facing, like an external force, almost.
Absolutely. And in the medieval tradition, it evolved into being framed as the sin of sloth. Thomas Aquinas defined it as sorrow about spiritual good.
Sorrow about spiritual good.
Yeah, like being saddened or repelled by the very things that should bring spiritual joy. It was seen as a turning away from the divine that could lead to despair. Its manifestations included things we might recognize today. Boredom, tedium, a deep dissatisfaction with their lives, specifically their spiritual lives in that context.
It's interesting how a feeling we might describe as burnout or maybe even depression today had such a strong spiritual context back then.
Totally. This historical perspective reminds us that what we might frame today as psychological or emotional struggles have often been understood through very different cultural and spiritual lenses throughout history.
Okay, what about melancholy? What insights does that offer compared to acedia?
Melancholy has very ancient roots, too, linked to the old theory of humor specifically, an excess of black bile.
The four humors.
Exactly. This was thought to cause symptoms like lethargy, sadness, fear, irritability, even cognitive difficulties. But during the Renaissance, its understanding became much more nuanced.
How so?
It became associated with scholars and artists. It was sometimes even seen as a sign of depth, sensitivity, intellectual prowess.
Oh, interesting. Like a creative suffering.
Kind of, yeah. But it was a double-edged sword. It could also lead to inaction, withdrawal, a deep weariness with life. This shows how a condition once seen perhaps more physiologically could also be interpreted culturally as a mark of a certain temperament.
So it had both a physical explanation and almost a romanticized interpretation.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have ennui, which emerged later, particularly in France.
Like the boredom of the rich.
Well, yeah, often associated with that. It's that draining listlessness, that profound boredom. But it was really tied to the 18th and 19th centuries and the more affluent or leisured classes.
Okay.
It was often seen as arising from having too much leisure and not enough to do, a lack of purpose. And interestingly, it sometimes came with a sense of guilt about feeling that way.
A sort of weariness born from privilege, but still a real feeling of emptiness.
Precisely. And by looking at these different historical concepts, acedia, melancholy, ennui, we can see a clear evolution in how we've attributed the causes of this deep tiredness.
Yeah, definitely.
Shifting from spiritual failings to physical imbalances, then to socioeconomic factors, and finally towards more personal, psychological, philosophical confrontations.
And that shift must have impacted how society viewed it and what solutions were offered.
Absolutely. Massively. Our listener's initial question, touching on so many contemporary issues, drugs, lies, relationships, greed, it really reflects this complex and ever-evolving understanding of what seems to be a very old human struggle.
So drilling down then, what are the really significant underlying causes of this extreme tiredness in our modern context? It seems to stem from so many different directions.
It truly does. Our sources point to a convergence of several major factors. Let's maybe start with just the fundamental human condition.
Okay, the basics.
Yeah. We have basic needs, obviously survival, health, safety, but also those more complex higher order needs. Belonging, esteem, a sense of purpose, personal growth, meaning.
Maslow's hierarchy, sort of.
Kind of, yeah. The ongoing effort to meet all of these, especially the higher ones, can be a major source of weariness in itself.
Just the everyday demands of being human, trying to build a life.
Exactly. And add to that the sheer cognitive load of navigating our daily lives and making countless decisions, big and small, that all adds up. Furthermore, our relationships play such a crucial role. Supportive connections can be a huge buffer against weariness. But strained, toxic, or just absent relationships, they can be a significant drain.
Definitely.
And then there's the trajectory of our lives. our careers, our aspirations for wealth or education. If those things don't align with a deeper sense of personal meaning, they can lead to profound disillusionment down the line.
That feeling of climbing the ladder, only to realize it's leaning against the wrong wall.
Precisely that. And then, as we mentioned, you have those existential crises that tend to occur at different stages of life. Adolescence, quarter life, midlife, later life, where we find ourselves questioning our identity, our purpose, our place in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Underneath all of this, according to thinkers like Viktor Frankl, is our fundamental drive as meaning-seeking beings. He called it the will to meaning.
The will to meaning.
Yeah. And when that drive is consistently frustrated, when we can't find or make meaning, we can experience what he called an existential vacuum.
An emptiness.
A profound sense of emptiness, despair, purposelessness that contributes massively to this feeling of deep tiredness. It's almost a paradox. Our very efforts to improve our lives materially, to make things easier or last longer, might inadvertently create new burdens if they become disconnected from that intrinsic sense of meaning.
So the more we try to optimize life in some ways, the more complicated it becomes in others, potentially leading to this weariness.
In a way, yes, if the focus becomes too narrow. Now let's consider the biological aspects for a moment.
Okay, the body's role.
Chronic stress, we talked about that.
Okay.
The resulting allostatic load, that wear and tear from the prolonged stress response, takes a real physical toll.
Right.
Interestingly, research suggests that people with a stronger sense of purpose tend to have lower allostatic load.
Really? So meaning can actually protect your body.
It seems to act as a buffer, against the physical effects of stress. Then there's anhedonia, that diminished ability to experience pleasure. That's linked to disruptions in the brain's reward system, the dopamine pathways, and it can be significantly affected by chronic stress, too.
That lack of joy or inability to feel it can certainly contribute to feeling deeply tired and hopeless.
Absolutely. And we also need to consider the neurobiology of existential anxiety itself. Those persistent, distressing thoughts about our existence, about mortality, meaninglessness, they can really impact our overall quality of life.
Think about the phenomenon of doom scrolling and how that can just amplify those feelings.
Exactly. It feeds that anxiety loop. However, it's not all negative on the biological front. Research indicates a strong correlation between having a clear sense of purpose and better physical health outcomes.
Like what?
Lower risk of mortality, stroke, lung disease, cognitive impairment, and generally engaging in healthier behaviors.
Wow.
Conversely, unmet existential needs, particularly during times of serious illness like cancer, can lead to profound suffering, helplessness, loneliness, loss of meaning. It becomes a kind of vicious cycle.
How so?
A lack of existential meaning can negatively impact our biological systems, stress response, reward pathways, which in turn can deepen our sense of tiredness, apathy, and hopelessness.
So our minds and bodies are just completely inextricably intertwined in this experience of extreme tiredness.
Absolutely. You can't really separate them. And then, layered on top of all this, you delve into the philosophical undercurrents.
Like the big ideas.
Existentialism, with its focus on our radical freedom and the accompanying responsibility that can be both liberating and, frankly, terrifying.
Yeah.
A source of significant anxiety.
Yeah.
Sartre's notion that we are condemned to be free really encapsulates this tension. We have to choose. We have to create our own meaning.
That's a heavy lift.
It is. Heidegger spoke of angst or dread as something that reveals the ultimate nothingness, but also calls us towards a more authentic way of being, living in awareness of our own mortality, our being towards death. And Camus explored the inherent absurdity, our deep human desire for meaning and order, clashing with what seems like a silent, indifferent universe. He called for revolt against this absurdity, finding meaning in the struggle itself.
These are profound ideas that directly address the core of our existential weariness, the big why questions.
Exactly. It's a lot to grapple with.
Yeah.
And then Barry Schwartz's concept of the paradox of choice adds another modern layer to this.
How does that fit?
In our world, saturated with endless options for everything, careers, partners, consumer goods, lifestyles, that very freedom, that abundance of choice can become overwhelming.
Right. Decision fatigue.
Yes, but deeper than that, too. It can lead to increased anxiety, indecision, dissatisfaction, regret. The sheer weight of having to constantly choose, often without clear guidance, amplifies the existential burden of freedom.
Makes sense.
Even Buddhist philosophy offers a perspective, suggesting suffering arises fundamentally from craving, attachment, and ignorance of the true nature of reality, impermanence, and non-self.
Different angle, but still addressing dissatisfaction.
Right. And thinkers like Schopenhauer saw suffering as inherent in the blind will to live, while Nietzsche, famously declaring God is dead, argued meaning must be created through asserting our will to power and embracing life, even its hardships.
So many different philosophical takes on why we feel this way.
And the point is, the sheer weight of constant, often high-stakes decision-making in a world that maybe offers fewer clear, universally accepted guiding principles that can be incredibly exhausting on an existential level.
It's like we constantly have to invent the rules and play the game.
That's a great way to put it. And finally, we absolutely must consider the significant societal pressures.
Okay, the bigger picture.
Emile Durkheim's concept of anomie, that state of normlessness or social disintegration that can arise from rapid social change, economic upheaval, or weakened collective values.
Right.
It leads to confusion, frustration, alienation, what some call social pain. It's linked to higher rates of deviance, crime, even suicide. Things like family stability or, conversely, the fetishism of money can influence it.
When the social fabric feels frayed.
Exactly. Then there's societal disillusionment. History shows us examples, think after the Black Death, or the World War's major events that shook collective meaning and led to shifts in worldview. Postmodern thought itself can be seen as reflecting a disillusionment with grand, overarching narratives. And then there's the pervasive influence of materialism and consumerism in many societies today. That relentless pursuit of possessions often correlates with lower life satisfaction, higher anxiety, strained relationships, and ultimately a sense of emptiness. It fosters a scarcity mindset and constant social comparison, undermining more authentic sources of meaning.
Keeping up with the Joneses, but on a global digital scale.
Yeah. Critical theory, particularly from the Frankfurt School, also points to how systemic power structures, dominant ideologies, alienation, and reification, treating people like objects, contribute to social control and even a kind of manufactured discontent. The culture industry pacifies us with superficial entertainment.
Wow.
And let's not forget modern technological pressures, the cognitive overload in the information age, the age of AI boom scrolling again.
Right.
And the more subtle, pervasive effects of surveillance capitalism are experiences turned into data, impacting our sense of autonomy, potentially challenging our very sense of self.
It really does feel like society itself, the way it's structured now, can contribute massively to this overwhelming feeling of extreme tiredness.
Absolutely. And these various pressures, individual, biological, philosophical, societal, they have tangible consequences.
How so?
Well, on us as individuals, emotionally, it can manifest as apathy, cynicism, hopelessness, irritability, anxiety, depression, despair, loneliness, meaninglessness, just feeling numb.
Yeah.
Behaviorally, we might see maladaptive, coping the drugs, alcohol, compulsive behaviors we mentioned earlier, or maybe antisocial behavior, aggression, withdrawal, neglecting health, pursuing superficial goals. Intrapersonally, it strains relationships. Apathy, irritability, a lack of empathy take a toll. It impacts partnerships, parenting, friendships. And in work or education, you see burnout, reduced engagement, lower productivity, lack of motivation, difficulty concentrating.
And on a broader societal level.
Well, you can see breakdowns in social cohesion, that anomie we talked about, increases in deviance and crime, an erosion of trust, sometimes called truth decay, collective crises of meaning following major upheavals. It can even impact the fundamental order of life if our pursuit of progress is too narrowly defined, say, just material wealth, leading to unintended negative consequences like environmental damage, inequality, and ultimately widespread weariness.
This intricate web of causes affecting us personally and societally, it makes you wonder what a completely different kind of intelligence, say an AI, might be able to tell us about all of this human wariness. Could it see patterns we miss?
That's a really insightful question. While AI obviously lacks the subjective experience of being human, its capacity to process just vast amounts of data offers a potentially unique lens.
How so?
Well, fields like affective computing and computational psychiatry are increasingly using AI to model complex emotional and cognitive states.
So AI can actually try to recognize emotions or analyze sentiment in human data, like text or video.
Yes, exactly. Through various techniques, analyzing language patterns in text, interpreting facial expressions, voice tone, even processing physiological data like heart rate variability sometimes. The goal is often to develop AI that can better sense, interpret, predict, and maybe even respond appropriately to human emotions.
Okay. Where would that be used?
Potential applications range from improving how we interact with technology, making interfaces more intuitive or empathetic, to providing more personalized mental health support, maybe even in safety systems.
The way an AI understands something must be fundamentally different from how we humans understand it, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel tired.
That's the crucial point. Absolutely critical. An AI's understanding is based entirely on identifying correlations and recognizing patterns within the data it's trained on. It doesn't have that first-person subjective experience, what philosophers call qualia.
Qualia, the what it's like feeling.
Exactly. So while an AI might be able to identify patterns associated with tiredness in human behavior or language, maybe changes in speech patterns, decreased activity levels, certain words used frequently.
It doesn't actually feel that tiredness itself. There's a huge gap there.
So its main contribution might be in spotting connections and complex patterns that we humans might overlook due to our own biases or just the sheer scale of data.
Precisely. An AI could potentially identify really complex multifactorial correlations that are too subtle for us to consciously perceive. For example, it might find specific combinations of linguistic cues, online behaviors, and reported symptoms that are strong indicators of, say, burnout versus existential fatigue.
Okay.
However, the lived experience of existential fatigue, that deep personal sense of the weight of the world, the subjective quality of that feeling, that's likely beyond its grasp, fundamentally.
It's like it can analyze the symptoms, describe the patterns, but it can't truly grasp the feeling behind them, what it means to the person.
That's a great analogy. So if an AI were tasked with creating a tiredness algorithm, hypothetically,
it would analyze massive data sets of human expression, text, speech, behavior, reported symptoms to try and identify clusters of related experiences. It would look for statistical regularities.
I could look for patterns in what we express when we're feeling this kind of profound weariness.
Yeah.
What words we use, how often we interact.
Exactly. But the real challenge, the likely insurmountable one for current AI, lies in deciphering the deeper semantics of existential fatigue, that very personal, felt sense of it, the meaning attached to it.
Right.
AI operates on correlation, on statistical probabilities, not on deep causal understanding, and certainly not subjective experience. It might get good at predicting who is likely to report existential tiredness based on their data footprint. But it wouldn't genuinely understand why it matters so deeply to that individual. It lacks the context of a lived life.
And it can process and discuss philosophical concepts, right?
Yeah.
Like meaning and purpose, Camus, Frankl, but it doesn't have its own self that is actively searching for them or experiencing that lack.
Precisely. It can generate incredibly sophisticated text about the ideas of Camus or Frankl because it's been trained on vast amounts of human writing discussing them. But it's a simulation of understanding based on pattern matching. It lacks that inherent lived need for meaning or the direct visceral experience of existential dread or angst.
Yeah.
The hard problem of consciousness, explaining how and why we have subjective experiences, remains a significant philosophical and scientific barrier to AI truly grasping these deeply human aspects of experience. However, there's an interesting theoretical framework called the free energy principle that offers another, maybe complementary way to think about this computationally.
Okay, tell me more about that. Free energy principle.
It was proposed by Carl Friston. It's a highly influential, though complex, computational framework drawing from physics and information theory. The core idea is that all self-organizing systems, from single cells to brains to potentially even societies, strive to minimize surprise.
Surprise. Like unexpected events.
Essentially, yes. Or more technically, the difference between their internal model of the world and the sensory input they actually receive. Minimizing this prediction error or free energy helps the system maintain its structure and resist entropy, basically stay alive and functioning.
Okay.
So from this perspective, extreme tiredness, whether psychological or existential, could potentially be viewed as a state of chronically high surprise or prediction error, a persistent mismatch between our expectations, our internal model, and reality.
So it's our internal map of how things should be or how we should feel doesn't align with what's actually happening, creating a kind of ongoing internal stress or dissonance.
Exactly. And interventions from this FEP perspective might focus on helping us refine our internal models, learning, therapy, modify our environment to reduce unexpected negative events, niche construction, or perhaps recalibrate our beliefs and expectations about the world.
And AI could potentially play a role in modeling these complex dynamics, trying to understand how different factors increase or decrease that surprise.
Potentially, yes. It could model the interplay of different stressors and coping mechanisms within this framework. However, there's a potential risk here, a kind of ethical consideration too.
What's that?
If AI becomes too convincing in its simulations of understanding human emotions, we might be tempted to anthropomorphize it. We might start relying on what could ultimately be a superficial form of comfort, a simulacrum of solace, as one source put it.
A fake comfort.
Yeah. It could inadvertently mask our deeper human needs for genuine connection, understanding, and meaning, potentially leading to a form of technological alienation where we engage with simulations rather than authentic experience.
So we might feel like we're getting support or being understood, but it's not really addressing the core human issues at their root.
Exactly. It's a potential pitfall. However, flipping it around, this detached AI perspective, analyzing vast amounts of human data, it can also act as a kind of mirror. By reflecting patterns in that data back to us, it could potentially reveal societal trends, hidden biases, collective blind spots related to weariness or well-being that we might otherwise miss. This could prompt a really valuable form of societal self-examination. It's a really complex interplay, this intersection of human experience and artificial intelligence.
It absolutely is. And this all raises some really important ethical questions, doesn't it? When we talk about this profound weariness, where does the responsibility really lie? Is it primarily an individual struggle, something we need to fix ourselves?
Right.
Or are there larger systemic forces at play that we need to address?
That's a crucial tension to consider, and the sources really grapple with it. Historically, as we discussed with acedia being viewed as a sin, the emphasis has sometimes been heavily placed on individual moral failing. You feel bad, it's your fault, pull yourself together.
Yeah, that attitude still exists.
It does. However, more contemporary perspectives like our understanding of burnout as often resulting from chronic workplace stress or sociological theories of anomie, highlighting the impact of societal breakdown, place much greater emphasis on those external systemic factors.
So the environment matters a lot.
Massively. The ethical challenge lies in navigating this balance. We undoubtedly have individual agency. We make choices. We have responsibility for how we cope with difficulties. But we also need to critically acknowledge the profound influence of societal structures, cultural norms, economic pressures, technological environments on our well-being.
Our listener's point about people seeming to laugh, cry, or get angry on purpose seems to touch on this idea of agency versus just being acted upon by feelings or circumstances.
Precisely. And there's a kind of ethical paradox here, too, which critical theory points out. Individuals may often internalize blame for their feelings of weariness, feeling inadequate or broken, while the very systems they operate within might actually contribute to or even subtly benefit from their state of malaise.
How could systems benefit from people feeling tired or unhappy?
Well, think about critical theory's analysis of consumer culture creating manufactured discontent to drive consumption, or how certain aspects of the attention economy might thrive on keeping us anxious or outraged to maximize engagement. Surveillance capitalism profits directly from data about our struggles. So, addressing this profound weariness ethically requires both providing support at the individual level, therapy, self-care, meaning-making, and engaging in a critical examination, and potentially reform of the larger systems and structures that shape our lives.
So just assigning blame solely to the individual is ethically incomplete, maybe even unjust.
Exactly. It ignores the context. And what about that difficult question? Why do some individuals seem to exhibit cruelty or indifference towards the suffering of others, even when we, intellectually at least, understand the concept of extreme tiredness and suffering?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Our sources suggest a few possible angles, none simple. Viktor Frankl's idea of the existential vacuum, that profound lack of meaning, he suggested it, can sometimes manifest not just as apathy or despair, but also as aggression, a will to power, or turning outward in destructive ways.
Filling the void with negativity.
Perhaps. Jung's concept of the shadow self also points to the darker aspects of our nature, the aggression, selfishness, cruelty that we often repress or deny, but might project onto others or act out under stress.
Okay.
And a state of societal anomie where shared values and moral guidelines weaken can erode our sense of concern for others, our empathy. If the rules are gone, why care?
Right.
The ethical question here is complex. Does cruelty and indifference represent an extreme manifestation of extreme tiredness, perhaps a complete shutdown of empathy stemming from one's own overwhelming suffering or lack of meaning? Or are they indicative of distinct psychological conditions like psychopathy or narcissistic personality disorder, which involve inherent deficits in empathy?
It's probably not an either-or situation.
Likely not. It's plausible that profound, chronic weariness can erode our capacity for empathy, making the struggles of others seem less relevant, or even making other people seem like mere objects or obstacles. It offers a more nuanced perspective than simply labeling such behavior as inherently evil, though it certainly doesn't excuse it.
It's a disturbing thought. And who, if anyone, actually benefits from this widespread human weariness, this malaise?
That's another critical question the sources touch upon. Critical theory, again, would suggest that dominant groups or systems within society might benefit, consciously or unconsciously, from a population that is alienated, distracted, or operating under a kind of false consciousness, making them less likely to challenge the status quo. Aspects of surveillance capitalism, as we said, certainly profit directly from collecting and analyzing data about our emotional states, including our distress, to predict and influence our behavior.
Right, targeted advertising based on vulnerability.
Exactly. Materialistic societies fuel entire industries that offer products and services promising escape, happiness, or fulfillment, often capitalizing on our underlying anxieties or feelings of emptiness. Even the culture industry, entertainment, media can be seen as providing superficial distractions that ultimately maintain the existing social order rather than encouraging critical reflection or change.
So it raises significant ethical questions about potential exploitation and the responsibility of these systems and enterprises in contributing to the problem.
Absolutely. It's not just about individual choices. It's about the structures that shape those choices and potentially profit from our pain.
It feels like we might be caught in a kind of self-perpetuating cycle sometimes.
Yeah.
And the listener also mentioned being tired of both lies and truth. How does that fit into this overall picture of weariness?
That's a really insightful point, highlighting the crucial role of epistemology, how we know what we know, and our belief systems. The fundamental human search for truth and meaning is often deeply intertwined. We want to understand the world and our place in it. When that search is consistently frustrated by perceived dishonesty from leaders or institutions, the overwhelming spread of misinformation, the deliberate sowing of doubt, the erosion of trust in established sources, it can lead to profound cynicism, confusion, and a deep sense of exhaustion.
It's tiring trying to figure out what's real.
Incredibly tiring. Buddhist philosophy, interestingly, speaks of suffering arising fundamentally from ignorance, avidya, not seeing the true nature of reality, like impermanence. In our contemporary post-truth era, the phenomenon some call truth decay actively undermines our shared understanding of reality. It erodes trust not just in institutions, but in each other. It contributes to what experts call epistemic insecurity, that unsettling feeling of being adrift in a sea of unreliable information, not knowing who or what to believe. The sheer cognitive effort required to constantly navigate this complex, often contradictory information landscape is itself incredibly draining. It contributes directly to mental exhaustion.
And belief systems. They can help, right? Provide meaning.
They absolutely can provide a vital sense of meaning, purpose, and community. But they can also lead to disillusionment and even oppression if they fail to hold up to scrutiny, become rigid and dogmatic, or are imposed in harmful ways. When beliefs clash with reality or are used to justify harm, that can also be a source of profound weariness and moral injury.
So the erosion of truth isn't just an abstract philosophical problem.
Yeah.
It attacks the very foundations upon which we build meaning and trust.
Exactly. It makes those fundamental existential questions, who am I? What is my purpose? What is real? Even harder to answer. It exacerbates anxiety and potentially contributes to that societal enemy, that feeling of normlessness. Our struggle for epistemic integrity, the ability to trust what we know and communicate effectively based on shared facts, is deeply linked to our overall psychological well-being and our very capacity for a meaningful existence.
And AI plays a role here too, right? For good and bad.
A definite dual role. AI can be used to generate and spread disinformation at an unprecedented scale, amplifying truth decay. But AI tools are also being developed to help detect fake news, manipulated media, and bots, potentially helping us fight back. It's a critical, albeit complex, element in this ongoing struggle for a trustworthy information ecosystem.
So these modern existential threats, the constant cognitive overload from the digital world, the pervasive reach of surveillance capitalism monitoring our lives, and this erosion of trust in truth, they're all significant factors fueling this extreme tiredness we're discussing.
Absolutely. They contribute significantly by creating chronic stress and uncertainty, diminishing our sense of agency and autonomy, and fracturing our shared understanding of reality, all of which makes the fundamental human quest for meaning even more challenging and frankly, exhausting.
Okay, so we've really explored the depths of this extreme tiredness, its history, its many faces, its complex causes. What can we actually do about it? What are some effective ways people cope with these feelings, beyond the destructive ones?
Right. Our sources highlight a range of both maladaptive and, crucially, constructive coping strategies. The listener's initial query mentioned things like drugs, alcohol, compulsive sex, greed, lying.
Yeah.
These can often be understood, perhaps sympathetically, as attempts to fill that underlying existential vacuum or to numb the pain, the anxiety, the emptiness associated with this deep weariness. But as we know, and as the sources confirm, they tend to create far more significant problems in the long run. They don't solve the underlying issue.
They offer maybe a temporary escape, a fleeting sensation, but ultimately exacerbate the core issues of meaninglessness or disconnection.
Precisely. Now, on the more constructive side, the things that actually help build resilience and meaning, our sources emphasize practices like mindfulness and meditation.
Okay. How do they help here?
They can help us cultivate present moment awareness, reduce the ruminative stress that fuels so much anxiety, and develop a calmer, more observant relationship with our own thoughts and feelings.
Getting some distance from the overwhelm.
Exactly. Self-reflection and journaling are also powerful tools. Taking the time to explore our thoughts, emotions, values, and experiences can lead to greater self-understanding and clarity about what truly matters to us. Actively embracing our core values and pursuing passions, things we find inherently meaningful or engaging, can provide a strong sense of direction, purpose, and vitality.
Doing things that feel authentic.
Yes. And cultivating supportive social connections is absolutely crucial. Meaningful relationships combat loneliness, offer different perspectives, provide emotional support, and reinforce a sense of belonging.
Can't underestimate connection.
Definitely not. Practicing gratitude, consciously shifting our focus towards the positive aspects of our lives, however small, can counteract negativity, bias, and foster contentment.
Simple but effective.
Yeah. Techniques from cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, can help us identify and challenge the negative, often automatic thought patterns that contribute to feelings of hopelessness and exhaustion.
Changing how we think about things.
Right. And then there are meaning-centered approaches, like Viktor Frankl's logotherapy. This emphasizes our capacity to find meaning in all circumstances, through creative work, through experiences like love or appreciating beauty, and crucially, through the attitude we take towards unavoidable suffering.
Finding meaning even in hardship.
Exactly. Existential therapy similarly encourages us to confront life's givens, freedom, responsibility, isolation, mortality, meaninglessness, and to take responsibility for our choices, live authentically in alignment with our core values, even amidst difficulty.
Okay.
And finally, building overall psychological resilience, developing the skills and mindset to adapt well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, or significant stress. Things like CBT and mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, can help build this.
So these more constructive strategies, they empower us to actively engage with our feelings of weariness, maybe even transform them into catalysts for personal growth or finding deeper meaning.
That's the idea. Rather than just being overwhelmed by it, using it as information, as a signal that something needs attention or change.
And what about the potential role of AI in all of this? We talked about its limitations and understanding, but can it actually offer any meaningful support in alleviating this kind of tiredness?
It's a developing area, but AI holds promise in several domains, according to our sources. In the realm of mental health support, for instance, we're already seeing AI-powered chatbots and virtual therapists. While not a replacement for human therapists, they can offer basic emotional support, psychoeducation, personalized feedback, help with mood tracking, and practice cognitive reframing techniques. They offer accessibility and anonymity.
Okay, so like a first line of support, maybe.
Could be. AI is also being integrated into stress reduction and meditation apps, offering personalized guidance or tracking progress. Furthermore, thinking about cognitive load, AI could potentially assist us in managing the overwhelming information overload, filtering, summarizing, prioritizing information that contributes so much to mental fatigue.
That would be useful.
It could also play a role, perhaps, in enhancing our understanding of complex philosophical and psychological concepts. Imagine an AI that could synthesize information from diverse sources, explain ideas clearly, maybe even act as a kind of Socratic partner to help us explore our own beliefs, assumptions, and identify logical fallacies in our thinking.
So it's more about augmenting our own capabilities, our self-reflection, our stress management, our information processing, rather than providing some kind of quick technological fix for existential angst.
Exactly. The vision is more towards a synergistic partnership. Leveraging AI's ability to process information, identify patterns, and offer structured support, combined with essential human capacities for meaning-making, emotional depth, and genuine connection. It's about a holistic approach, ideally, but the listener specifically raised the importance of teaching children about tiredness. Why is early education in this area so vital?
Yeah, that struck me too, teaching kids about being tired.
Well, maybe not just tired, but about emotions, stress, resilience, meaning. Fostering the early development of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, social skills, and adaptability lays a crucial foundation for lifelong resilience.
Building the toolkit early.
Exactly. Programs like Philosophy for Children, P4C, are interesting here. They encourage critical, creative, caring, and collaborative thinking about fundamental life concepts: fairness, friendship, truth, happiness from a young age in an age-appropriate way. Parenting practices that emphasize cooperation, empathy, independence, healthy emotion regulation are also key. Education, ideally, should aim to cultivate meaning-making skills, critical thinking abilities, and emotional resilience, not just focus on the accumulation of factual knowledge, avoiding what Frankl called nothing butness, reducing complex human beings to mere biological mechanisms or social statistics.
Helping kids see the bigger picture, find their own values.
Right. The ultimate goal is to help children develop an internal locus of control, a robust sense of self, and effective coping strategies that will enable them to navigate life's inevitable challenges, including feelings of weariness or disillusionment, more effectively. This could reduce the likelihood of succumbing to profound existential tiredness later in life.
So it's a proactive approach, kind
Yeah.
of like an existential inoculation, equipping them early.
That's a good way to think about it, helping them understand and manage their inner lives, especially during potentially turbulent periods like adolescence, where these big questions often surface intensely. It's really a long-term investment in their future psychological and existential well-being.
So as we come towards the end of our deep dive here, it's just incredibly clear that this extreme tiredness is, well, it's a deeply complex and multifaceted experience, isn't
No,
it?
absolutely, with roots stretching across psychology, biology, philosophy, history, society, technology. It's all interconnected.
And while both human insight from personal experience, therapy, philosophy, and the analytical capabilities of AI offer valuable perspectives, there are still inherent limitations to our complete understanding. AI can't feel it, and we can't always articulate it perfectly.
That seems true. And it suggests that maybe some degree of weariness, some grappling with these big questions, might just be an unavoidable, even necessary part of the human condition.
And perhaps, as some of the sources hint, it can even be a catalyst, something that pushes us towards growth, self-discovery, and the search for deeper meaning, rather than just something negative to be eliminated.
That's a really key insight to take away, I think. The path forward likely involves a combination of things: cultivating individual resilience strategies, finding personal meaning, fostering genuine connections, and also thoughtfully, critically engaging with technology, including AI, as a potential tool for support, while always holding on to our fundamental human need for purpose, authenticity, and real engagement with the world and each other.
So perhaps this ongoing struggle with tiredness in its many forms isn't something to be entirely eradicated, as if it were just a disease, but maybe more something to be understood, navigated, listened to, and even learned from.
Precisely. Perhaps it's a fundamental aspect of what it means to be human-aware, finite, free, and searching, constantly prompting us to re-examine ourselves, our values, and our place in the world. We really encourage you, listening, to take some time to reflect on your own experiences with weariness in light of some of the ideas we've explored today.
This is DigitView.